For those that are visiting, new to us, we're going through one of the letters in the New Testament. It's called Romans. Paul, one of the apostles, who had this amazing conversion. When he was going on a road to go and actually arrest Christians, God met with him. Jesus met with him. His life was turned around. Absolutely turned around. And so he started then going telling people about Jesus rather than arresting them. And he wrote a letter to the church in Rome, the Christians who were meeting in Rome. And Rome needed Jesus. Littlehampton needs Jesus. You and I need Jesus. Your neighbours and work colleagues need Jesus. This is how Paul starts his letter to those Christians in Rome. That the Son of God, Jesus, has come. That he is Lord and Saviour, the Messiah, the promised one. And it's good news for the Romans, even with their heated baths and their grand colosseums. And it's good news for us too, in our consumerism, in our Netflix and Nando's obsessed world. I heard someone say that, I thought I like that, I'll use that. Our Netflix and Nando's obsessed world. As we work through Paul's letter, we're seeing it gradually build and build and build. It builds to a fantastic climax around chapters 8 and 9. But first, after introducing this idea of a gospel, of good news, Paul moves our attention to a brokenness. To brokenness, our broken world. A key verse is Romans chapter 1 verse 32. If you've got a Bible, you've got it on your phone, whatever, you can look it up. Romans chapter 1 verse 32. It says this: although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these things, but they also approve of those who practice them. See, before we climb the lofty heights of future chapters in the letter, we first need to go down into the reality of a broken world, of broken humanity. Paul takes us on a journey, descending us down into what we could probably call the valley of sin. That's what he does. And all of us need to go down into this valley, this dark place of brokenness, to really grasp how amazing the good news is. It's only when I realised how broken my life was that I realised I needed a saviour. And so Paul, after doing the grand big introduction, goes, right, let's just go down now and see, where is humanity? Where are we? Verse 18 says this: the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and the wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. God's wrath is being revealed. His wrath is his anger towards everything that ruins the good world that he made. We've been singing about creation a lot this morning. Everything that damages it and destroys it, actually God's wrath is turned towards it. Now this isn't the anger of an out-of-control dad or a drunken person who just lost their control. This is not that kind of anger. God's anger is a righteous anger that comes from a heart that actually cares. He cares about what he's created. He cares about you and me. And it comes from a compassion of love. And the wrath of God isn't just a one-time event. Notice how Paul says the wrath of God is being revealed. Is being revealed. It's a continuous thing. It happens in our present life now. As far as Paul is concerned, judgment isn't just some future event. It's already here with us. The wrath of God is being revealed. It was being revealed in ancient Rome, and it's being revealed today in Littlehampton. How is the wrath of God being revealed? Well, I wanted to point three things. Well, Paul doesn't actually. Paul takes us on a little journey. He takes us on a journey because he focuses first of all on creation. Oh, need to move on. We'll go back. Which way? There we go. He focuses on creation and talks about creation. And then he says, and then we need to recognise sin. And then we come to judgment. Let's have a look at them together. Creation. This is verses 18 to 20 in his first chapter of his letter. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. What's Paul saying? He's saying that God can be known by looking at creation. God can be known. We can all understand what God is like by looking at the world around us. And God continually is displaying his power, his nature in creation. Jack is an artist. Clinton is an artist. They're both painters. They're both very good artists. But if you were to look in Jack's lounge at the art, if you go to Clinton's house and see his art, it's different. Brilliant, but different. Why? Because their characters come through their paintings, don't they? Right? Jack's character comes through his art. Clinton's character comes through his art. God does the very same thing. On the canvas of creation, the very character of God is displayed. So, there's no excuse. We can all know God. And then we come to this problem of sin. Paul shows us that what happens when people reject what they know deep down to be true. This is what happens. 3 times in this chapter, he talks about an exchange that's going on. 3 times there's an exchange. Verse 23, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal humans, birds, animals, reptiles. See, we exchange the glory of God for idols, made to look like created things. Do we? I don't think we do that. Do we do that nowadays? Do we do that? We might not make statues that we worship, like it says there. They used to do that, didn't they? We don't do that. But have a look at this one, though. Verse 25, it says this. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator. They might not be making little statues, but we find ourselves worshipping things that God created rather than the one who created them. The planet is one of those things. We can become worshippers of the planet, of the earth, of Mother Earth. Or we worship people and we put them on these pedestals, don't we? And we worship them. We can even worship ourselves, can't we? We find ourselves to be the focus of our worship. That's what happens. A 3rd time, Paul uses this word exchange. Verse 26. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. 3 times, Paul says, exchange goes on. We exchange truth for a lie. We exchange God's natural order of sex and relationship for something different. We create and put other things as our focus for worship rather than the glory of God. But sin isn't just about being naughty. It's not just about being naughty or breaking rules. Do you know what sin really is? It's replacing the God of all creation with something that's false. That's what sin is. Rather than worship Creator, we worship lesser things. And Paul says that's just foolish. Foolish. Every single one of us, every single human on the planet has been created to worship. It's in our very DNA to be worshippers. And so if we reject worship of the true God, we'll find alternatives to worship. We'll create idols. We'll give significance to lesser things, place our security, our very identity in those things. And often, we think we're choosing things that we can control. That's what we think. Oh, I'll worship that and I can control that, can't I? Like my career. Or a lover. Property. Sport. Financial investments. My body image. Academic achievements. I mean, the list can go on. Things that we actually think, I can control that and I'm going to give myself wholly to this thing. But when we make those good things, because they are good things, but when we make those good things actually our focus of worship, we're exchanging the best for something inferior. And what we find is those things aren't under our control either. We don't find, actually they become the control of our lives so often. Now we might not go over the threshold of a temple with an animal to sacrifice. We might not do that now in our day. But we do make sacrifices. We make sacrifices. Sacrifices for our security. That can become our worship. Got to get my pension up. Or for pleasure. And we sacrifice other things so that I can have that pleasure. Or for sport. Fame, popularity, even holidays. We make sacrifices because that's the most important thing in our lives. Holidays. We exchange the truth about God for a lie. And we worship created things rather than the Creator. Final thing Paul focuses on is judgment. So if creation displays the glory of God, but humanity has chosen to exchange worship of God for lesser things, surely God's just going to stop us in our tracks and finish us off. Surely that's what he'll do. Bang! How dare you not worship me? Is that what God does? No. It's not what God does. In fact, Paul says, God actually gives us over to the thing we desire. What? He lets us go. He almost like says, open the door, go on then. Try life without me. Paul says this in verse 24, therefore, God gave them over to their sinful desires of their heart. God opens up the door and gives people what they desire. Jesus told a story. It's a wonderful story. It's in Luke chapter 15, if you want to read it perhaps later. But it's about a farmer, a landowner, and two sons. And the younger son goes up to his dad, really disrespectfully, and he says, Dad, I know you haven't died yet, but I'd like my half of the inheritance now. Can you give it me now? I mean, that's just awful. But in love, the dad said, okay, you can have half your inheritance. Here it is. Here's yours. Have it all. Almost like God saying, open the door. Open the door. Open the door. What does the son do? Goes off and wastes it. Wastes it on terrible things. Thinks he's got loads of friends around him, but as the money runs out, he finds there's no one left. He gets so desperate. As a Jewish man who can't have anything to do with pigs, he ends up working in a pig farm. He ends up actually with the pigs, looking at the pods and the rubbish that they're eating, wishing like he could eat that That's how desperate he got. And that's what God does. We're saying, no, I'm not going to worship you. I'm going to worship something else. He said, well, okay. He opens up the way. In Romans 1 verse 26, Paul says it again. He says, he gave them over to shameful lusts. That idea of shameful lusts actually could be translated as overlust. When you want something so much, you become absolutely obsessed with it. You become controlled by it. All right? You could call it an addiction, I guess, couldn't you? That's how strong it gets hold of you. And you end up being ruled by the very thing you thought would fulfill you. It happens with money, doesn't it? If you worship money, you know what? You end up living in fear that you won't have enough. If you worship beauty and body image, you just feel ugly, inadequate when you compare yourself to others. That's what happens. If you worship intellect, you sat in a meeting and you're just desperately hoping no one realises how foolish you are, and you put your foot in it and say the wrong thing because you just have made that your God. See, apart from worshipping God, everything else will leave you eventually empty. It actually will eat you alive in the end. Sin is such a destructive force. It leads to darkness. It leads to disconnection in relationships. And ultimately it will lead to death and separation from God. See, that's God's wrath. We see the wrath of God displayed when he removes his protective hand and allows these disordered desires to run away with us. And it leads us down to the valley of sin. And you know what? Because the evil one is a master of lies and deceit, when we go down that slope into the valley of sin, we just find ourselves in more and more darkness. That's what happens. And you know what? We can be blind sometimes to the catastrophe the impact of our sin is having on us, but also on those we love. And if you haven't seen that up close and personal, then thank God. Thank God. It is devastating. It is destructive. It leads to so much pain. Not just for the one choosing to sin and ignore God, but for the others around them as well. The very thing we think will lead to life and fulfillment, actually it dehumanizes us. Now, just as a aside for a moment, Paul often does little case studies when he's writing a letter. And he takes a theme and he goes, okay, so I've told you about creation and sin and judgment. Let's have a look at this little case study. And in here, in Romans chapter 1, his case study, he's actually looking at sex. That's what he's doing. So we can look and understand these issues in life by thinking about creation, sin, judgment. Oh, where am I? I think that's right. Creation. Oh, that's what I wanted. Creation. Do you know, we can look in Genesis where it outlays how God created the world, and we can see that sex is a good gift. It's a gift from God. It's a gift for a husband and wife as they come into unity together. Intimacy. It's for intimacy. And it's for forming a family, having children. That's what God created sex for. So what about sin? Well, it's when we mistreat this amazing gift. See, living in ancient Rome, those Christians living in ancient Rome, it was clear to them something had gone wrong with sex. Absolutely clear. Orgies, brothels, temple prostitutes, a culture of rape and abuse. I won't go into all the details, I've read quite a lot about it, it's awful. Absolutely awful what was going on at that time. Sex had turned dark. That's what you get when disordered desire takes over. The divine gift is exchanged for dark, shameful lusts. And that leads to brokenness. But it's not just ancient Rome where it was going on. It's going on today. It's exactly the same. It has been in every age. And I think in many ways it might be a bit worse now. Sexual sin dehumanizes us. So what about judgment then? Well, Paul shows that God gives us over then to our sinful desires. God gave them over to depraved minds that they do not do what they ought to be done. They become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, depravity. Now you might be thinking, okay, I'm okay. I haven't done that. I'm not got involved in any sexual sin. I'm fine. Well, Paul then gives a few other things in his list. Paul goes on to show this. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. What hope is there for any of us? What hope? Although they know God's righteous decrees that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but they approve of those who practice them. You recognise that in our culture? What Paul shows is that none of us are off the hook. We've all exchanged God's glory for other things. And it makes us less than human. Pretty bleak message, isn't it? Today, Paul's taken us down into this valley of sin, showing us how all of us find ourselves on a slippery slope where we make other things our focus of worship, and it leads to brokenness and death. But remember, Paul started his letter a few weeks ago. We looked at this, declaring that there is a new gospel. That just means good news. There's good news. This doesn't sound like good news, does it? There is good news that God in his love has come to earth to rescue us. Jesus, God's Son, has demonstrated through his resurrection that he is Messiah. He is our Lord. Why is that good news? Because each of us are stuck down in the pit of despair in that valley of sin. Let me take you back to that story of that son who asked his dad for his inheritance. So he's with the pigs, yeah? He's lost all the money. Everything's gone. He's desperate. And he thinks to himself, do you know what? The servants in my dad's farm, they get treated better than I am. I'm going to go back and I'm going to ask my dad, Dad, can I just come and be a servant? So he leaves the pigsty and he starts the journey home. But then, while he was a far way off, his father saw him. His father didn't just wait for him to come to the front door. His father burst the door open and he ran through the village and out of the village into the hills where he could see his son. And what did he do? Can't see it very well. It's an embrace. He embraced his son. He embraced his son. That's what God does to us. It's exactly what God does to us. See, that father of the farm is God. The son, he went and spent it all on, it's us. And if we turn, the Father comes and embraces us. How can a pure, holy God do this? Well, remember, Paul talks about 3 exchanges we do. We exchange truth for a lie. We exchange worship of God for worshipping of other things. We even exchange our sexual purity for immorality. There are 3 exchanges. But you know what? There's another exchange that took place. See, we're in the valley of sin. Here we go. This is me. I'm in the valley of sin. That's my life. I can't get out no matter what I do. I can try and be good. I know what, I'll just go and help out in all the charities in the town. That'll do it. I'll be nice. I'll smile at everybody I see in the street. Oh, I'll make sure I pay my taxes. I won't lie. I'll do it. I can't do it, actually. I can't escape. And what happens is God comes into the valley to meet me where I am. into my mess, into my unrighteousness. The righteous God, here he is. The righteous God, holy God, he enters into my mess. Now, if I'm going to be accepted by God, I need to be righteous. I need to be holy and pure. Because, if I come into God's presence in the mess I am now, death. I need to be holy. All I've got, though, is my sin. All I've got is my sin. God's got what I need, but I don't deserve it. I don't deserve this righteousness. And what I do have, God absolutely hates. He absolutely rejects sin. So what is God's answer to this situation? His answer is his Son, Jesus Christ. The Son of God, who died in our place, who bore our condemnation, whose body bore my condemnation. My sins he bore. See, 2 Corinthians, another letter Paul wrote to a church in Corinth, says this: for our sake he made him, Jesus, the perfect one, to be sin, and he knew no sin. And in him we might become the righteousness of God. That's the exchange. That's the exchange that took place that day, that Easter, when Christ died on the cross. I can't stress it too much that Jesus is God's answer to our greatest problem. We have a joke in our midweek group. We read a bit of the Bible and then we ask some questions and we talk about it and everyone jokes about, well, the answer's going to be Jesus, isn't it? It's going to be Jesus. Sometimes it is. But it is actually, the answer is Jesus. You can't love Jesus too much. You can't. You can't think about him too much. You can't thank him too much. You can't depend on him too much. You see, all our forgiveness of our sin laid on him, if we turn to him. All his righteousness imparted to us so we can be with our Father in heaven. It's amazing. See, that's why the prodigal son could return to his father. Even though he'd wasted all the money and messed up big time, he could return to the father, not because he'd done anything, but because the Father had made it possible for him to return. Because the God in heaven had done it all at the cross. If you're worshipping lesser gods, if you're stuck in slavery to sin, if money or intellect or fame or beauty or sex have become your God, the solution isn't to try harder to sort it out. That's not the solution. It's not, I'm just going to try harder tomorrow. Tomorrow it'll be better. That's not the answer. It really doesn't do it. The answer is, put all your focus, all your attention on the ultimate prize. Make him your God. Worship him. Because you're made for worship. And when you worship the glory of God, the power and the seduction of those lesser gods dissipates away. It really does. Will you live a life totally free? Not until Christ returns. But you will see things dissipate and fall away. Because Christ has done it at the cross. Should we worship him? Isn't he worth worshipping? Come on, let's stand.